How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting off. I don't know. What are we up to? Daf Kuf Mem Beis? I think. Hope so. Oh yeah, I think so. I don't know. I already had 2 coffees. Why is my brain not working? Alright, we're starting off. Well, okay, so we're starting off Kuf Mem Beis of Masechta BavaBasra. Alright, we're going to start off Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Beis. We got a bunch of work to do on Daf Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Beis. We're also only going to get a little bit more than halfway through Kuf Mem Beis Amud Beis. So let's do it. All right. So Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Beis, only about 5, 6, or maybe about 7 lines in. 7 lines in. And Daf Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Beis. Auda Amrla, yo. Auda Amrla Visu. Guru. So a person says to his wife, Nichsai Lehai demi abras, my estate is going to, you're pregnant, your fetus will inherit my estate. So the shaila is, can you be makne, can you be mezake to an uber, to a fetus? Omer Ravuna avi mezake le-uber, va-mezake le-uber lo kona. So Ravuna says that you're giving your estate to a fetus. You can't give an estate to a fetus. You have to give an estate to a person who is already born. The baby is already 1 day old, that's fine, but not when it's just an uber. Okay. So Rav Nachman asks a kasha on Rav Huna, and this kasha on Rav Huna is going to take us for most, if not all, of today's daf. Rav Nachman Rav Huna. Ha'omer im yolda ishti zocher yitol mana. Well, our Mishnah states that if somebody says that if my wife is pregnant, if my wife gives birth to a boy, a zocher, so that boy will receive $100, 100 zuzes. Yolda zocher. So if in fact his wife gives birth to a boy, notal mana, so that boy will receive 100 zuzes. So we see in our Mishnah that you can be makne to an uber. You can be makne to a fetus. Right? He says, if this fetus turns out to be a boy, that boy will receive 100 zuzes. Omerle, so Rav Huna responds, Mishnah Seinu, Eni Odea Mishana. He says, Taka? It's a good question. I don't get it. I don't know who the author of our Mishnah is. Because it doesn't, right. I'm saying that you cannot be mezake to an uber. The Mishnah is saying that you can be mezake to an uber. I don't know who the author of our Mishnah is. Doesn't make any sense to me. Wait, why does Rav Huna not know who the author of our Mishnah is? That he says, it makes no sense to me. Why? Why can't Rav Huna simply say, the author of our Mishnah is, drum roll please, Reb Meir. The Reb Meir says that a person can be makne, davar shelo bala olam, something that is not yet in this world. Amar deshamis le Reb Meir li davar sheshno ba'olam. But I'll say that Reb Meir says you have to be makne to a davar sheshno ba'olam, to a human being who is already born. Reb Meir would not say that you can make a kinyan to an uber, to a fetus, to an unborn human. You cannot be mezake to an uber, according to Reb Meir. Why does Rav Huna not respond and say that our Mishnah is authored by Reb Yossi, the Amar who says uber kani, that an uber can make a kinyan. Ditnan, as we learn in a Mishnah in Yevamis, uber posel ve'eno meichel de Reb Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says that an Uber can be posel v'namaichel. What does that mean? Who can explain this Gemara, this Mishnah? This is talking about a kohen who's married to a Bas Yisrael. So a kohen obviously eats truma, and a Bas Yisrael obviously does not eat truma. However, when they get married, when a Bas Yisrael marries a kohen, so then she can eat truma because she's married to a kohen. Now, if they get divorced and there's no children, they get married and they get divorced, so she can no longer eat truma. But if they had a baby together, well then she can eat truma, right? The son will be able to eat truma, so she can also eat truma. What if when her husband dies she's pregnant? That is what the Mishnah is talking about, right? The husband dies and she's pregnant. She has an unborn baby. If the baby was born, she'd be able to eat truma. But we're saying that this fetus, this uber, posel ve'eno ma'achil. Let's start with ve'eno ma'achil. Eno ma'achil means that he does not enable his mother to eat truma on his account. Right? If he was born already, if you have a born child, so the born child is ma'achil. Right? On account of the child, the mother is allowed to eat truma. Meaning normally Bas Yisrael can't eat truma, but she was married to a kohen. They had a baby together. The kohen died, but the baby is archid a kohen. The baby can eat truma, so the mother can also eat truma. So on account of the baby, the mother can eat truma. However, in uber, eino maichil. The mother would not be able to eat truma on account of the uber. Additionally, posel, what that means is that if there are avodim, okay, so if the father, the kohen, passed away, and there's this uber, so the uber is going to inherit, right, when the uber is born, he's going to inherit the estate of the father. Now, if the father had avodim, so the uber would inherit the avodim as well. But they would be possible from being able to eat truma. They would not be allowed to eat truma, those avodim. But what do we see? We see that the uber would be kone the avodim. He was saying posel, the uber is posel the avodim from being able to eat truma. One second. Where am I? Okay. Let me just check something quickly. Okay. Yeah. So, uber posel v'enoma, uber posel se eved, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Posel. So posel is posel the eved from being able to eat truma. Right? Normally, the eved of a kohen would be able to eat truma. However, if the kohen dies and he doesn't have any children, but there's an uber, that uber is going to inherit the avodim, but would be posel the avodim from being able to eat truma. Now, what do we see? We see that the uber is kohen inherits the avodim. So we see that you can be makne to an uber. The uber is kohen avodim. So why don't we say that the Mishnah, which says you can be mezakeh the $100 to the uber, is Rabbi Yossi, who says that an uber can be can inherit these avodim and be kohen these avodim. Azoi. So where am I? So Shaini Yerush Abba Me'elel. Well, that case of Rabbi Yossi is a little different because it's talking about inheritance as opposed to being mizaket to somebody, right? Meaning in our Mishnah we're talking about, being makne to an uber $100. Rabbi Yossi is talking about an uber inheriting his father. So inheritance, which Memele, when the baby is born, he's going to inherit his father's estate. So that's one thing, and we're saying that yes, that the uber would inherit the avodim. However, for somebody just to say that I'm being makne to an uber $100, that would not work. Okay, so Shani Yerusha, I'm reading that again. The inheritance, which is Rabbi Yossi's scenario, Haba Melea, is different, and the uber would not be kone that. All right. Wait, what? Yerusha, the uber would be kone the avodim, but if you're makne to an uber, that doesn't work. Why does why doesn't Rav Huna say that our Mishnah, which says that you can be mezaket in Uber, is Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, the Omar, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says, Lo Shana Yerusha v'lo Shana Matana. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka's opinion is, as we've seen, that a father who's got a few sons can be morish his estate to one of his sons in particular. And he says there's no difference between whether it's a Yerusha or a gift. Makes no difference. It's fine. You could be, morish or give matana to one of the sons. And we want to assume that that's even an Uber. So you'd be able to give a matana, be able to be makna even to an Uber. That's not as we learned in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, Imamar al Misha Roy Liyarsho Dvarv Kayomin. That if he says it about somebody who's fit to inherit him, so that works. So Emad the Shama said Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka the Davar Sheyesh Nabalim Davar Sheyesh Nabalim Yomer. But 1 second, I'll say Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka though is specifically talking about a baby that is born, not an unborn baby. We say Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka would say you cannot be makne to an Uber. V'lemni Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka v'savar leKrab Yossi. Okay, but why don't we say it's a combination? It's Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka who says that you could be, makne to your children, and it's like Rabbi Yossi who says that even an Uber. So kind of you combine those and say that our Mishnah is a combination of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Yossi, and that's why you can be makne to an Uber. Mi yemer de savla, yeah, but who says that Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Rabbi Yossi? Okay. Where am I? Alright, why don't we say that our Mishnah is talking about mivasreini, meaning he's not being mizake the Uber with 100 zuzes, he's being mizake the mavasr, the person who comes and says your wife gave birth to a boy, he's giving that person 100 zuzes. If that's the case, if that's the case, when the Mishnah continues and says Im ein sham yoresh elahu, the Mishnah had said later on that if the only child of the father is a tumtum, so then the tumtum will inherit the father. Yorish hakol, he'll inherit everything. Even Basreni Yorish ma'avite. But if we're saying that the Mishnah is talking about the mavasar, what is the mavasar inheriting? Sorry that it is just like, I don't know, very just like, what if this, what if that, what if the other thing, what about this, what about that, what about the Seifa? Sorry, it's like very like that. Why doesn't Rav Huna say, well, actually our Mishnah is talking about, is not talking about where he's mizaket in Uber, rather our Mishnah is talking about where the baby is already born. If that's the case, the Katoni Seifa, when it says in the Seifa, Vim Omar Kol Masha Teled Ishti Yitol, that if he said that that if he says whatever my wife gives birth to will get $100, then even a tumtum will get the $100. How is it Yitol? Wait, what? Yitol, raise the Yitol, so then even the tumtum would receive the Yerusha, you receive the $100. Kol sheteled, kol sheyolda mi baile. But if we're talking about a baby that's already born, then why are we saying sheteled, that my wife will give birth to? Which is say that my wife did give birth to. Why don't we say that it's talking about that he says when my wife gives birth? So again, let's like back up to the beginning briefly. Rav Huna's opinion is that a mezakah the Uber lo kanu, you cannot be mezakah to an Uber. So our question is, why does our Mishnah then say that a person can be mezakah $100 to an Uber? So we're suggesting now, after many suggestions, well, maybe our Mishnah is talking about where he's not being mezakah to the Uber, he's being mezakah to the baby when it's born. Right? Lichsheteled, when the baby is born, I will be mezakah then the $100 to the born baby. Yes, but this is the opinion of Rav Huna that we're talking about, and Rav Huna says that would not work. Right? If you say lichsheteled, that does not work. Damer Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman says amazaka lo uber lo kana. Rav Nachman says if you're mizaka to an Uber, it does not. There's no kinyan. Lichsheteled kana. But according to Rav Nachman, if he says that when the baby is born, that's when I'm being makne, so then that would work. Rav Huna Amar says, Rav Huna af lichsheteled lo kana. And Rav Huna says that even if you say lichsheteled, it makes no difference. It does not work. Rav Sheshes Amar echad zeh ve'echad zeh kana. Whereas Rav Sheshes says actually either way it does work. Whether you're mezakeh to the uber, whether you're mezakeh for when the baby's already born, either way that is fine. Amar Rav Sheshes mina aminala says Rav Sheshes, how do I know this? The Tanis we learn about a ger shemes. So if you have a proselyte who passes away, so of course we've seen several times that the halacha is that if a proselyte passes away and has no relatives, so then his property is hefker, and whoever makes a chazaka on it first, it's that person's. So you have a gershemes, you have a proselyte who passed away, uvizbezu yisrael nechosav, and everybody went and quickly, first come first serve. Everyone went to go and grab what they could from his estate because there's nobody to inherit him. Because of course a ger shen is gayer could cut in shenola domi, right? That a ger when a proselyte proselytes, so then it's like he's born again and he has no relatives. So ger shemez v'izbezu yisrael nechasav, but then v'shamu sheyesh lo benu sha'isa ishto muberes. But then they find wait, there's taka a son, or his wife is pregnant. So now all of a sudden chayav and achzer, they need to give it back. So if they gave everything back, but then they find out, wait, the son died. Yay! Or the wife miscarried. So they're like, oh, okay, I guess we can take this stuff again. So erzik bashniya kana. So if they retake the stuff a second time, so then it belongs to them. But if they only have the initial chazaka, then that does not work. So clearly, right? So we said that if they had initially made a chazaka on the property, then they found out that the wife is pregnant, so they have to give it all back. And even if the wife then miscarries, so then they have to make a second chazaka. So clearly the existence of the uber made a difference. Uber lo kani, because if it enters your mind that an uber does not make any kinyan, well then why do they need to make a chazaka nachamo? They had already made a chazaka. All of a sudden it turns out that there's an uber. So clearly the existence of the uber means that the uber is kone and not them. And actually that their chazaka is no good. And the property belongs to the uber. When it turns out that the uber died, right, that there was a miscarriage, so then it no longer belongs to the uber. So then they have to make a second chazaka, but the first chazaka was no good because it belongs to the uber at the time. So clearly we're saying that an uber is kone, because if the uber was not kone, well then what difference? If an uber is not kone, who cares if there's an uber or not? The uber is not kone. So it must be that the uber is kone, which is why the initial chazaka does not work and they have to make a second chazaka. Right? If the uber does not make a kinyan, why would they have to make a second kinyan? They already made a chazaka initially. So Abaye says, well, that isn't necessarily such a proof, right? Because this is Rav Sheshes bringing it as a proof to say that even an uber is kohen. Abaye says that's not necessarily a proof, because here we're talking about Yerusha specifically. We're talking about the uber inheriting his father. So because it's Yerusha Abba Me'eleh, we're not talking about being mizakeh to an uber. We're talking about an uber inheriting automatically his father's estate. So an uber inherits his father's estate, but we can't necessarily be makne to an uber. Okay, so Yerusha Abba Me'eleh Shine. That's not a proof that it can be makne to an uber. It does demonstrate that an uber will inherit his father. Sure. Rava says actually in uber is not kona, even by inheritance. An uber is not kona, says Rava. But shiny awesome. But the reason why they have to make a second chazaka over there is because the rapui marpion biadayu meikara. Because the first time they didn't make a good chazaka. The first time they didn't make a good chazaka. What does that mean? It means that when they initially made a chazaka, all they heard was there was a proselyte. The proselyte died. There's an opportunity to get stuff for free. There's an opportunity to just, loot his estate and take whatever you can. And there's a mad dash. Nobody's doing research right now to figure out, does he have kids? Does he not? I heard maybe his wife is pregnant. Maybe there's some kids someplace. No, there's no time. You do your research, you get nothing. Right? Shoot first, ask questions later. So therefore, when they heard that the proselyte passed away, there was a mad dash to loot the estate. And they were looting the estate kind of with this without full knowledge that they will actually be able to keep the estate, because if there's a child, then they're going to have to give it to the child, but they don't know. So therefore, when they made their initial chazaka, it was kind of a suffix chazaka betzim, because they hadn't yet actually done the research to know if there's actually going to be a baby or not. And therefore, when it turned out that there was a baby, but then the baby died, so they have to make a second chazaka, because the first chazaka wasn't a real chazaka. Excuse me, 1 second. All right. So that's why they have to make a second chazaka. But an uber really is not konen. My benai, what's an afkamina between Abaye and Rava? Right, both of them betzim say you have to make a second chazaka. Well, Ike benayu, the nafkamina would be sheshamu bo shemes. Well, what if the order was a little bit different? They had heard that the proselyte died. They had also heard that the uber died. So now they say, wow, okay, there's nothing stopping us. Kilu, they had done all the research that they had to do prior to looting the property of the proselyte. So therefore, when they went to the proselyte's property initially, they came to make a real chazaka, because their research indicated that the uber had died, and therefore whatever they looted would be theirs. So they made a starke chazaka. But vilomes, the fact of the matter is that actually the uber was not dead. The uber was still alive. But then the uber died. So according to Rava, who says that look, an uber is not kona, it's just that initially they didn't make a real chazaka because they actually didn't know if they would be able to keep it, because they hadn't actually researched to know if there's a baby or a fetus. But in this case, they had done the research. The research indicated that the uber was not alive, and therefore they made a chazaka, assuming that it was mamash 100% chazaka. Turned out that they were actually wrong. But then it turned out that the uber then died. But the initial chazaka was a starka chazaka. The uber was never kohen anything according to Rava, so it's theirs. They don't need to make a second chazaka in this case. According to Abaye, though, who says that because we're talking about Yerusha, so actually the uber would be kohen. Well, then they would still have to make a second chazaka, because the first chazaka was not enough, because when it turns out that the uber was actually alive, so it belongs to the uber, not to them. So when the uber is dead, then they have to make a chazaka, a second chazaka. All right, yeah, okay. This is a little bit of Gemara. All right, okay, a little bit of Gemara. Remember in BavaBasra when it was like this every single day? Every day was like a mission. Remember BavaBasra? Toshma, come here. Tinok ben yom echad nochel umanchil. That a baby that is 1 day old, nochel, can inherit. So, for example, if the father dies on that, the day that the baby is born, the father dies. So the baby, the 1 day old baby, will inherit his father. Umanchil, if the baby then dies that day as well, so then he'll be manchil to his brothers. Oh gosh, sorry. Ben yom echad in uberlo. So it's a kasha and Rav Sheshes, right? Because Rav Sheshes says that an uber, can be kona. But over here, the Mishnah is specifically saying, or Brisa is specifically saying that only if the baby is 1 day old can it inherit, but an uber cannot inherit. So it's a kasha on Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes will say, and the Rashbam gives some extra context over here, which is, yes, but you can ask on this Mishnah that this Mishnah is weird because what value is the baby adding here? I mean, let's say there was no, meaning that you have the father dies. Let's say the baby wasn't born at all. So the brothers who are alive would divide up the inheritance. Okay. Now we're talking about there was actually a 1 day old baby, so that baby inherits the father when the father dies. Then the baby dies, so then the brothers inherit the baby. So what role is the baby playing? At the end of the day, the brothers are inheriting the same thing regardless of if the baby was born or not. So what's the point of the Mishnah? So Rav Sheshes, so to answer that, Rav Sheshes says, yeah, look, the Mishnah is teaching something else. It's not teaching that an uber is not kohen. No, it's not teaching that. It's giving a specific scenario. Nochel benichse aim lahanchil la'achin mina of. No, what it is that if this baby was born to a different mother than those brothers, right? So let's say there was Yaakov, okay, and then there's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. They all come from Leah. And then there's Yosef, who comes from Rachel. Or let's even say Binyamin. Right, so Binyamin comes from Rachel. Why am I saying Binyamin? I'm saying Binyamin because Rachel died during childbirth for Binyamin. So be'etzem, so the scenario is that Binyamin is born, right? So normally Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda would not inherit Rachel. Rachel's not their mother. Binyamin is born, Rachel dies. Binyamin inherits his mother, Rachel. So, and then Binyamin dies, which didn't happen in the Torah, but in our case, Binyamin then dies. So now, Binyamin obviously doesn't have any kids, he's 1 day old baby. Yaakov is dead too. So who inherits Binyamin? His brothers. But Davka, if Binyamin is 1 day old. If, however, Binyamin was an uber, then Binyamin would not inherit Rachel, and Rachel's inheritance would not go to Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Capish? So if Sheshes says, don't prove from this brisa that an uber is not kohen. No, this the context of this brisa is something else. Homer of Sheshes says, Nochel benichse ha'em. We're talking about that a 1 day old baby inherits his mother if his mother dies the day that he's born. And if the baby dies that day, then he will be manchil his inheritance, which is his mother's inheritance, to his brothers from the same father, from Yaakov, who would not have otherwise inherited Rachel. And specifically, if the baby, if Binyamin is 1 day old, aval uber lo, but if it's an uber, no. So right, if Rachel dies while she's pregnant with Binyamin, well then Binyamin as an uber would not inherit his mother, and then when he dies would not bequeath to his brothers from Yaakov, to Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. My timer, how come? Dehu ma'is bereisha, because the fetus dies first, right? It's not that Rachel dies and then Binyamin. Rather, Binyamin, right, Uber Binyamin dies first, and then Rachel. Ve'ena ben yoresh es imo bakever, and a child does not inherit his mother when he's dead. In order to bequeath to his brothers from the same father. Wait, did we just say that the uber dies before the mother? But there was once happened that the mother died and the uber was still moving around. So Marber of Ashi midava azanov halatoyishim farkes. It says Marber of Ashi. The fact that the uber was moving around doesn't mean that it was alive. Rather, just like the tail of a lizard can move around and flop around after the lizard is no longer alive. So that's what was happening with the uber. It wasn't actually alive; it was just moving around. Omar Marber of Ashi says Marber of Ashi midava azanov halatoyishim farkes. We just said that. Marber of Yosef mishmei derave Omar. Of Yosef he explains that Mishnah, right? Remember, there was that Mishnah that says that a one-day-old baby inherits and bequeaths. So Shadar is what's the relevance of the one-day-old? I don't know if I said 1 year, but one-day-old baby. What's the relevance of it? Even without the one-day-old kilu, right? As I said before, right? The brothers would inherit, right? Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda would inherit Yaakov anyways. Now we're saying Binyamin was born, so he inherits together with them, but then he dies, so then he gives his portion to them, so they get the same amount anyways, regardless if Binyamin was alive or not. So if Sheshis answers it and say that actually it's talking about inheriting Rachel, not inheriting Yaakov. Says Marbre Rav Yosef Mishmei Derava that you could also say that it's talking about inheriting Yaakov, but the Chiddush is in terms of the Bechora. Lomar Shemamayt Bechelek Bechora. That meaning, forget about Rachel. Ki'ilu Yav Reuven Shimon Levi and Yehuda are the sons of Yaakov. Reuven is born, and that day Yaakov dies. So Reuven inherits. Wait, what? And that day, what? Binyamin is born, and that day Yaakov dies. So Binyamin inherits his father. He's a one-day-old baby. What? And what's the chiddush of that? And then he dies, and he bequeaths it to us. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is in terms of the bechora. When calculating Reuven's bechora. So how do we calculate it? Well, we divide up the estate among all the children, and then we give an extra portion, right? So if, in this case, there's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and Binyamin. So there are 5 kids. So you divide the estate in 6. Reuven gets 2 portions, and then the rest of the portions divided amongst everybody. So now, the remaining ones. So now the Chiddush, so basically what happens is, basically, the point is, so Rashi gives a different example. It gives less people, right? Let's say you have Reuven and Shimon, and we'll say Binyamin, okay? So if you have just Reuven and Shimon, and Yaakov dies, and the estate is divisible, it could be divided into 12 portions. I'm just using the Rashbam's example. So if the estate is divisible into 12 portions, if Yaakov dies, so you divide 12 divided by 3, Reuven would get 8 portions, and Shimon will get 4 portions, right? Pishnaim. Reuven gets twice as much as Shimon. Okay, so Reuven would get 8 portions, Shimon would get 2 portions. Now the thing is, if there's Binyamin as well, well now there are 3 kids, right? If Binyamin is 1 day old and Yaakov dies, so now there are 3 kids, which means that you divide the estate in 4, okay? In 4, which is each one, right? Okay, and then Reuven gets 2 portions. So basically, Reuven now gets 6. Shimon gets 3, and Binyamin gets 3. Now, if Binyamin that day dies, so his portion is divided in half. So 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. So now Reuven has 7.5, and Shimon has 4.5. So whereas so the question was, right, what difference does it make if Binyamin was born or not? If he was born, inherited his father, and then died that day, the difference is that if Binyamin was never born, well then Reuven would have gotten 8 parts and Shimon would have gotten 4 parts. But because Binyamin was born and was part of the inheritance division, that means that in the end, when Binyamin then dies, Reuven is getting 7.5 portions and Shimon is getting 4.5 portions, i.e., Reuven's Bechora is going to be less than it would have been if Binyamin was never born. So that's what it means. Okay, so Omar Marbre Ashi Mitid Hava. No, I keep reading that. Marbre Deravino, Marbre Derav Yosef Mishmei Derava Omar Lomar Shemamayit Bechelik Bechora, that Binyamin will negatively impact the size of Reuven's Bechorah. V'davka ben yom echad, and specifically if Binyamin is 1 day old, aval, uber, lo, but not if he's an uber, not if he's unborn. He would have to be born for that to happen. But again, it's not a proof of whether an uber is kone, right? It's not a proof that an uber is kone, it's not a proof that an uber is not kone. It should mean an uber is not mimayit the Bechorah. My time of v'yoldu lo amrachmanu. Because the pasuk says, right, it says by Bechor v'yoldu lo banim ahuva v'asnu v'yoah ben ha-Bechor lasniya. The Amar Ma'abed Rav Yosef Mishmei Rava, the Ma'abed Rav Yosef is in the name of Rava ben shenolad la'achar misasaviv, that a child who is born after his father dies, einu mamayit b'chelek Bechorah, will not decrease the value of the Bechorah. My time, how come? V'yoldu lo amrachmana ve'oleka, because the pasuk says v'yoldu lo, that the baby would have to be born in order to be part of the Bechorah equation. B'surah masnuachi, this is how they teach it in Surah. B'pumpetisa masnuachi, but in Pumpetisa they teach that statement that we just read as Ma'abed Rav Yosef Mishmei Rava, says Ma'abed Rav Yosef the name of Rava, Bechor shenolad la'achar misasaviv, that a Bechor who is born after his father dies. For example, let's say his wife is pregnant with twins, and then the father dies, and the wife gives birth to twins. So one of them is a Bechor. Eino nota pishnayim, that Bechor would not receive a double portion. My time, how come? Yakir amrachmanu ve'oleka, because the pasuk says, right, ki Bechor ben asnua yakir. He has to recognize him, and he can't recognize him if he's dead. V'alesa de yakir. V'ilchzak chol ani lishna da Amar Ma'abed Rav Yosef Mishmei Rava. The halacha is like these teachings of Ma'abed Rav Yosef in the name of Rava, that I guess the fetus is memayit, and that also the Bechor would have to be born in order to get his Bechorah. Fine. The father would have to be alive when the Bechorah is born. Amar b'Yitzchak, Amar b'Yochanan, hamazaka le'uber lo kana. So b'Yitzchak said to Rabbi Yochanan, if you're mazakat in uber, the uber is not kana. V'im tomer Mishnah sayinu. What about our Mishnah where he's saying I'm being mazakat to the uber 100 zuzes? Well, that's specifically because he's being mazakat to his own son. So therefore, because it's his own son, so he's doing it full-heartedly, and therefore that's why it works. But to somebody else's uber, it would not work. Like an uber in general would not. You can't be mazakat in uber in general. Amar le Shmuel, the Rav Chana Bagdata, pok aisili be'asar ve'emar loch ba'payu. Says Shmuel to Rav Chana Bagdata, go and get me 10 people, and I will say in front of this minyan, hamazakat le'uber kona. If you're mazakat in uber, you are kona. V'ilchaz, but halacha is hamazakat le'uber lo kona. That if you're mazakat in uber, it is not kona unless it is your uber, in which case, as Rav Yochanan said, you are kona. Wow, mitaka. Okay, that was Daf Kuf Mem Beis of Masechta BavaBasra. Some interesting stuff there, right? There's an opinion of Rav Huna that you cannot be mazakat to an uber. And then we were asking questions from our Mishnah. We got into this three-way machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Huna and Rav Sheshes. Rav Nachman says that Rav Nachman says you cannot be mazaket to an uber, but you can say I'm going to be mazaket to the baby when it's born. Rav Huna says no, you can't be mazaket to an uber. You can't even be mazaket for when it's born. Rav Sheshes says you can even be mazaket to an uber. We learned some other interesting things along the way. Peace out.